The day my father's oxygen machine went silent, my brother posted a ski trip photo from Aspen. He never visited, not once, in 8 months. But when the will was read, Trent showed up with a lawyer and a list of demands. So I gave him everything. The house, the savings, the truck, all of it. He took it with a smile. He had no idea what I'd already found hidden behind the refrigerator. Welcome to my new story. Trent's lawyer dropped the stack of papers on the table, and his face went the color of old milk. I watched it happen in real time. A grown man in a charcoal suit losing every ounce of composure while my brother grabbed his arm hard enough to wrinkle the fabric. "What does that mean?" Trent said. Dale Pemberton didn't answer. He just stared at the document in front of him like it had grown teeth. On the other table, the forensic audit sat open to page 11. And if you've never seen a forensic audit, let me tell you, it's just rows of numbers. Rows and rows of numbers that can absolutely demolish someone's life. Megan's Cancun brochure was sticking out of her purse. All-inclusive. Beachfront resort. She'd already picked the place, already packed the sunscreen in her head, already figured out which lounge chair she'd be lying on with a drink in her hand, paid for with money that didn't belong to her. I didn't look at my brother. I looked at the empty chair 3 rows behind him, the one where Delaney was supposed to be sitting. She'd texted at 7:14 that morning. Running late, traffic on 35W, with a little heart emoji. Casual, easy. The kind of text you send when you're running 5 minutes behind for brunch, not when you're about to be exposed for stealing from a dead man's bank account while his daughter held his hand and begged him to keep breathing. That was the last text I ever got from her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Way ahead. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to a house on Lyndale Avenue that smelled like motor oil and menthol cough drops. And the longest 8 months of my life. The house was a 3-bedroom rambler in South Minneapolis, the kind with a chain-link fence and a detached garage that leaned slightly to the left, which my father swore was intentional. "It's got character," he'd say. Like me. The garage door stuck halfway every single time, and he'd kicked the bottom left corner with his boot, and it had grown the rest of the way up. He'd been doing that since 1986. Never fixed it. Not because he couldn't. My father could fix anything. He just liked the routine of it. The front porch had a bench he'd built from reclaimed wood off a job site in Edina, and it was the ugliest piece of furniture I've ever seen. Uneven legs. A nail sticking out on the left armrest that snagged every jacket I owned. He was proud of that bench the way some men are proud of a boat. He sat on it every morning with his coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up like it was his personal television show. Inside, the kitchen was small and yellow, the kind of yellow that was probably trendy in 1978 and had been slowly embarrassing itself ever since. The linoleum had a crack that ran from the stove to the back door, and there was a coffee can on top of the refrigerator full of fishing lures that rattled every time someone closed the freezer too hard. And the refrigerator itself, that refrigerator was something else. Every square inch of it was covered in notes. Little index cards and scraps of paper held up by magnets shaped like fish. Largemouth bass, walleye, northern pike. My father collected those magnets the way other people collect stamps. He had 37 of them, and each one was holding up a note written in blue ink, his handwriting, sometimes neat, sometimes barely legible, always in pen. "Corinne, call the insurance company before Thursday. Travis, the left headlight on the Civic is out again. Garbage day is Tuesday, not Wednesday. I don't care what the website says." That was my father. Walter Aldridge. 64 years old. Retired, sort of. He'd been a plumber for 35 years in South Minneapolis. Licensed, bonded, insured, and opinionated about every faucet, toilet, and water heater in a 12-mile radius. He knew the plumbing in half the houses on our block better than the people living in them. Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, still called him every time her kitchen sink backed up, which was roughly every 6 weeks because she refused to stop putting potato peels down the garbage disposal. And every 6 weeks my father would walk over with his toolbox and fix it and tell her the same thing he'd told her the last 40 times, and she'd nod and smile and do it again 6 weeks later. He did crossword puzzles in pen, blue ink, always, because he said pencils were for people who didn't commit. He kept every important thing in his life on those index cards: appointments, birthdays, reminders, warnings. He said if it wasn't on the refrigerator, it didn't exist. My mother, who passed when I was 11, used to joke that the refrigerator was his real brain and the one in his head was just backup storage. And then there was the truck. 1978 Ford F-150, cherry red. It sat in the garage like a museum piece, which, in a way, it was. He'd bought it for $800 off a guy in St. Paul in 2017, and he'd spent 6 years restoring it. New engine, new interior, sanded and repainted by hand in the driveway over 2 summers. The neighbors complained about the smell. He brought them cookies and kept sanding. That truck was his pride, his joy, his proof that broken things could be made whole again if you were patient enough and stubborn enough and willing to spend your Sundays elbow deep in an engine block instead of watching football like a normal person. He taught me to change a tire on that truck when I was 12. He taught me to check the oil, replace a spark plug, and identify the sound of a loose belt from 30 feet away. I hated every second of it at the time. I'd give anything to do it again. My name is Corinne Aldridge, 33 years old. I worked as an assistant manager at a CVS on Lake Street, the kind of job where you spend half your day counting inventory and the other half explaining to people that their insurance doesn't cover what they think it covers. My husband, Travis Aldridge, drove long-haul trucks for a regional freight company out of Bloomington. He was gone 3, sometimes 4 days a week. Good man, quiet man, the kind of guy who shows love by checking your tire pressure and making sure the windshield washer fluid is topped off before a snowstorm. We lived 11 minutes from my father's house. I knew because I timed it. 11 minutes with no traffic. 14 if you hit the light on Lyndale and 36th. That distance was about to become the most important measurement of my life. Because in the spring of 2024, everything changed. And by everything, I mean my father sat down in a doctor's office on a Wednesday afternoon in April, and a young man with a medical degree and a wedding ring he kept spinning told us a word that I will never hear the same way again. But that part comes next. The doctor's name was Paulson. I don't remember his first name because the moment he opened his mouth, most of the normal information in my brain got shoved aside to make room for the thing he was about to say. He was young, maybe 32, close to my age, which felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. He had a wedding ring that he kept spinning with his thumb, around and around, like a nervous habit he didn't know he had. The office smelled like hand sanitizer and printer paper. There was a poster on the wall showing a cross-section of human lungs, and I remember staring at it while he talked, because looking at him felt like looking directly at a car accident. He said the word aggressive 3 times in 90 seconds. I counted. You count weird things when someone is telling you your father is dying. You notice the hum of the fluorescent light. You notice the way the doctor's pen is sitting at a slight angle on his desk and it bothers you, like if you could just straighten that pen, maybe the next sentence out of his mouth would be different. Stage 4. Non-small cell. It had started in the left lung, and by the time they found it, the time my father finally admitted that the cough he'd been brushing off since January wasn't just a cold, and wasn't just allergies, and wasn't just the dust from a job site in Richfield, it had already spread. My father sat in the chair next to me and didn't say anything for about 45 seconds. Which, if you know my father, is roughly 44 seconds longer than he'd ever been quiet about anything. Then he looked at Dr. Paulson and said, "Well, at least now I have an excuse not to fix the Hendersons' garbage disposal." Dr. Paulson blinked. I almost laughed. Almost. The sound got about halfway up my throat and then turned into something else entirely, something that tasted like copper and felt like swallowing a rock. We drove home in his truck. The F-150, he insisted. He'd driven himself because, and I quote, "I'm not dead yet, and I'm not letting you drive my truck." The engine rumbled the way it always did, this deep, steady vibration you could feel in your chest. He had a Johnny Cash cassette in the deck, not a CD, a tape, because my father believed that music recorded after 1985 was largely unnecessary. Neither of us talked for 7 minutes. Then he said, "Don't tell your brother yet. I mean it. Trent will panic. He'll fly up here and pace around my kitchen and knock things over with his elbows, because that boy has never once been in a room without bumping into something. I don't need that right now. I need quiet." So I didn't tell Trent. I told Travis. I called him from the driveway while Dad was inside making coffee like it was a normal Tuesday. Travis was somewhere between Minneapolis and Fargo, hauling industrial refrigeration parts. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" That's Travis. No drama, no big declarations. Just, "What do you need me to do?" I told him I didn't know yet. He said okay. He said he loved me. He said he'd be home Thursday. And I believed all three of those things equally, which is more than I can say about most things people tell me. The treatment was aggressive. That word again. Chemotherapy, radiation, a clinical trial Dr. Paulson mentioned with careful optimism. My father agreed to all of it with the energy he brought to fixing a clogged drain. Let's just get in there and figure out what's broken. But here's what nobody tells you about lung cancer until you're living it. The treatment doesn't feel like fixing something. It feels like dismantling someone, piece by piece, week by week. My father was 185 pounds when he walked into that office in April. By June, 160. By August, 142. I wrote every number in a spiral notebook I kept in my purse next to a packet of tissues and a granola bar I'd been meaning to eat for 4 days. The chemo made him nauseous. The radiation made him tired. The combination made him angry, which for my father meant quieter, and that was somehow worse than yelling. A man who had an opinion about every faucet in South Minneapolis, sitting in a recliner with an oxygen tube in his nose, staring at a television he wasn't watching. He stopped going to the garage. That was the first sign. My father had spent some portion of every day in that garage, working on the truck or organizing tools or listening to the twins on a transistor radio older than me. When he stopped, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The garage door still stuck halfway. Nobody kicked it. By July, he couldn't hold a wrench. He was at the kitchen table, and there was a leaky faucet in the bathroom that had been bothering him for weeks. He picked up the wrench, the red one with tape on the handle that he'd had since before I was born. His hand shook. The wrench slipped and hit the linoleum, and the sound it made was one of the loudest things I've ever heard. He looked at his hand. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw something in my father's eyes I didn't recognize. He was scared. "I picked up the wrench. I'll fix it." He said, "You don't know how to fix a faucet." I said, "You taught me to change a tire when I was 12. How hard can it be?" It took me an hour and 40 minutes and 2 YouTube videos, and I stripped a bolt so badly I had to drive to the hardware store on Nicollet for a replacement. But I fixed it. When I turned the handle and no water dripped, he nodded once. Just once. But that nod carried the weight of a man passing a responsibility he'd held for 35 years. By August, the oxygen machine became permanent. It hummed and clicked 24 hours a day in the corner of the living room. You stop hearing it until it stops, and then the silence is deafening. My father wrote notes on the refrigerator until his hand couldn't hold the pen steady. The last few were barely legible, shaky blue lines wandering across the index card like they were lost. One of them fell behind the refrigerator into the narrow gap between the back and the wall. I heard it fall. I was going to pick it up, but my hands were full and Dad was calling from the other room. I never did pick it up. That note, the one that sat in the dust behind the refrigerator for 8 months while I was too busy keeping my father alive to crawl behind an appliance and retrieve a scrap of paper, was going to change everything. I just didn't know it yet. By September, the leaves on Lyndale Avenue turned that deep Minnesota gold, and the air got that bite that tells you winter is coming whether you're ready or not. My father weighed 127 pounds, and I had stopped sleeping. Caring for a dying parent is not one moment. It's not a movie scene where you hold their hand and cry and the music swells and then the screen fades to black. It's 8 months of moments that blur together until you can't remember what day it is or what your own kitchen smells like or whether you ate lunch or just thought about eating lunch and then forgot. Here's what my days looked like from September through January. Wake up at 5:15, drive to Dad's house, check the oxygen levels, check the medication schedule, which was taped to the inside of a kitchen cabinet because Dad refused to use a phone app. I don't need a computer to tell me when to take a pill, Corinne. I've been swallowing things my whole life. Make breakfast, which by October meant warming up broth because solid food was becoming a negotiation. Help him to the bathroom. Help him back. Change the sheets if they needed changing, and they needed changing more often than either of us wanted to acknowledge. Drive to CVS. Work 8 hours counting inventory and processing insurance claims and pretending my eyes weren't red and my hands weren't shaking. Drive back to Dad's. Make dinner. Sit with him while he didn't eat it. Watch him fall asleep in the recliner with the oxygen tube, making a faint whistling sound every time he exhaled. Write his weight in my notebook every Thursday. 127. 123. 119. Fall asleep in the chair next to his bed around midnight. Wake up at 2 in the morning because the oxygen machine made a clicking sound that was different from its normal clicking sound. Stare at it for 40 minutes until I was sure it was fine. Fall back asleep at 3. Wake up at 5:15. Do it again. Sandra, the night nurse who came 3 times a week starting in October, was the only reason I didn't completely lose my mind. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and kept peppermints at the bottom of her bag, the kind with the red stripes, individually wrapped. She'd leave 2 on the nightstand every visit. By November, the taste of peppermint made my chest tight, and it still does. Travis came home every chance he could. He'd walk in at 11 at night smelling like diesel and road salt, and he'd find me at Dad's kitchen table surrounded by medical bills and insurance forms. He'd heat up whatever was in the fridge, set a plate in front of me, and sit there until I ate at least half of it. He never said much. He'd just sit. Sometimes that's the only thing that actually helps. But Travis was gone 3-4 days a week. That's the job. Long-haul freight doesn't stop because your father-in-law is dying. The trucks still need to move. The loads still need to arrive. And the bills, our bills, don't pause for grief. Trent called every Sunday night, like clockwork, 7:30, right after dinner, right before whatever show he and Megan were watching. The calls lasted between 4 and 11 minutes. I know because my phone logged them, and yes, I checked, because apparently that's the kind of person grief turns you into. Someone who measures love in minutes. How's Dad doing? I'd tell him the truth, the weight, the oxygen levels, the good days, which were getting rarer, the bad days, which were becoming the default. The time Dad woke up at 3 in the morning, convinced he was late for a job on Franklin Avenue, and tried to get dressed, and I had to help him back to bed while he argued with me about a pipe fitting that hadn't existed in 20 years. Trent would listen. He'd make sympathetic sounds. He'd say something like, "That's rough, Cor. I'm sorry." And then he'd say the thing he said every single time. "I'll come when I can." He never could. His daughter Harper had a dance recital. Megan had a work conference. The flights were expensive. Trent had a project deadline. There was always a reason, and the reasons were always reasonable, and that's what made it worse. Because each one, individually, made sense. But stacked together over 8 months, they built a wall. A wall made of perfectly valid excuses that was, in the end, just a wall. In November, Megan posted photos on Facebook. I saw them at 2 in the morning, sitting in the chair next to Dad's bed, scrolling on my phone because I couldn't sleep, and scrolling felt like doing something even though it was doing nothing. The photos were from Aspen, a family ski trip, Megan in a white jacket, smiling, Trent holding Harper on his shoulders, their son Mason, who was 8, making a snowball. Everyone's cheeks were pink. Everyone was laughing. The caption said, "Making memories with my favorites." I looked at the photos. Then I looked at my father, who was asleep with his mouth slightly open and the oxygen tube taped to his cheek because it kept slipping off at night. He weighed 115 pounds. His collarbone looked like it was trying to escape his skin. I closed Facebook. I put my phone face down on the nightstand next to Sandra's peppermints, and I sat there in the dark and gripped the armrests of that chair until my fingers ached. Trent called that Sunday. Same time, same script. "How's Dad?" I said, "He's getting worse. The nurse says it could be weeks now, maybe less." Silence. 4 seconds. Then, "I can't do this, Cor. I can't watch someone die. You know I can't handle it. You're stronger than me. You've always been stronger." In the background, I could hear Harper singing something. The television was on. It sounded like a cartoon. Trent was in his house in Denver, in a living room that probably smelled like microwave popcorn and whatever candle Megan had burning that week. And he was telling me he couldn't come. I said, "Okay." I said, "I understand." I didn't understand, but I said it anyway, because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. I say the thing that makes the other person feel better, and then I sit in a parking lot or a hospital chair or my own car in a dark driveway, and I grip whatever's closest, and I hold on. That was the last real conversation I had with my brother before Dad died. At CVS, things were slipping. Dr. Nguyen, the pharmacy manager, a quiet woman who communicated displeasure through precisely timed pauses, pulled me into the back office on a Thursday. She had a printout, 3 late arrivals, 2 full missed days. One time I'd been found in the stockroom sitting on a crate of cough syrup just staring at the wall. I don't even remember that last one. "Corinne, I value you," she said, "but I have a pharmacy to run." I almost cried in the break room afterward. Pam, the pharmacist, mid-50s, the kind of woman who keeps a stash of fun-sized Snickers in her desk drawer and distributes them like a battlefield medic, brought me a coffee and sat with me. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. And the person who actually showed up, every single time, without being asked, without being guilted, without needing a reason beyond the fact that I was drowning and she could see it, that was Delaney. If you've ever been drowning, not in water, but in paperwork and medical bills and the sound of an oxygen machine clicking at 3 a.m, then you know what it means when someone shows up at your door with a casserole dish and a bottle of cheap wine and says the 6 words that change everything. You shouldn't have to do this alone. That was Delaney Voss, my best friend for 9 years. The kind of friend who doesn't ask if you need help, she just shows up and starts helping, and by the time you realize what's happening, she's already organized your entire kitchen counter and is halfway through a load of laundry. I met her in 2016 at a Saturday morning yoga class at a community center on Bloomington Avenue. I was 24 and going through a phase where I thought yoga would fix my anxiety. It did not fix my anxiety, but it did give me Delaney, which turned out to be significantly more useful. She was 30, and she was standing on one leg in tree pose when her ankle buckled, and she grabbed the arm of the woman next to her, who happened to be me, and nearly pulled us both onto the floor. She steadied herself, looked at me with this completely straight face, and whispered, "If I break my ankle in here, at least the ambulance is close. There's a fire station across the street." I laughed so hard the instructor asked me to step outside and center myself. We went for coffee afterward. Then coffee became a weekly thing. Then weekly became texting every day. Then texting every day became the kind of friendship where you call someone at 11 at night to tell them something your husband said that annoyed you, and they listen for 45 minutes and then say, "Do you want me to come over? Or do you just want me to agree that he's wrong?" The answer, for the record, was usually both. Delaney worked as an insurance adjuster for a regional firm based in Edina, the kind of job where she spent half her day in other people's houses assessing damage and the other half writing reports that determined what those people's misfortunes were worth in dollar amounts. She was good at it, meticulous, detail-oriented. She could look at a stack of documents and find the one number that didn't belong in about 30 seconds flat. She'd been through a brutal divorce the year before from her husband Kyle, who had managed to accumulate $53,000 in credit card debt during their marriage without Delaney knowing about it. $53,000 on credit cards. I still don't understand how that's even physically possible. She got the condo in the divorce, a 2-bedroom in Uptown that she said felt like living inside a reminder. And she got the debt, because apparently that's how divorce works sometimes. You get the condo and you get someone else's financial catastrophe. Her hours at work had been cut. Something about restructuring and reduced claims volume. She was doing side work, freelance assessments for smaller firms, but it wasn't enough to cover the gap. She never complained about it. Not once. She'd mention it in passing, the way you'd mention the weather. Kyle's lawyer wants another $12,000. Also, it might rain tomorrow. She had a cat named Biscuit, orange tabby. 15 pounds of pure attitude and zero ambition. Biscuit's primary activities were sleeping on Delaney's laptop, knocking cups off the kitchen counter, and staring at visitors with an expression that clearly communicated he'd rather you left. He was, without question, the most unpleasant animal I've ever loved. Delaney started showing up at Dad's house in October, right around the time the days got short and the evenings got cold, and the loneliness of caregiving started to feel less like a mood and more like a permanent condition. She'd come after work, usually around 6:30, with a dish of hot dish, which, if you're not from Minnesota, is a casserole. Tater tots on top, cream of mushroom soup in the middle, ground beef on the bottom. Every household has their own recipe, and every household believes theirs is the correct one. Delaney's was her grandmother's, and it was, I will admit, excellent. She'd set the dish on the counter, pour 2 glasses of whatever wine was on sale at the Target on Nicollet, and sit at the kitchen table with me while I went through Dad's medical bills. She didn't just sit there, she helped, she organized receipts. She called insurance companies on my behalf when I couldn't form coherent sentences on the phone anymore. She sorted explanation of benefits statements into folders, color-coded, because that's the kind of person she was. "You're dealing with insurance and medical billing," she said one evening, flipping through a stack of claims. "This is literally what I do for a living. Let me handle this part. One person should have eyes on everything so nothing gets missed." It made sense. She dealt with financial documents and damage assessments every day at work. Appraisals, claims, policy limits, comparable values. So organizing Dad's medical bills and bank statements and insurance paperwork, second nature. She had access to everything. And at the time, I thought that was a blessing. She also started helping Dad directly. She'd sit with him in the living room while I took a shower, or ran to the pharmacy, or just sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes and cried, which happened more often than I'd like to admit. She'd read to him. Not books, newspaper articles. The sports section, mostly. Dad didn't care about most sports, but he liked the Twins, and Delaney would read him the box scores in this exaggerated broadcaster voice that made him smile even on his worst days. She'd hold his hand. She'd adjust his blanket. She'd make sure the oxygen tube wasn't pinching behind his ear, which it always did. She did these things naturally, without being asked, without expecting acknowledgement, like it was just what you did when someone you cared about was dying. One Thursday evening in late October, while Delaney was reading Dad, the sports section, and I was in the kitchen washing dishes I didn't remember dirtying, I heard him say something. His voice was thin by then. Tissue paper thin. But I heard it. "You're a good kid, Delaney. Better than most." I stopped washing. I stood at the sink with the water running and listened. "Thank you, Walter," she said. And her voice cracked, just a little. I cried into the dishwater. Sandra, who was setting up the night medications in the other room, brought me a peppermint and squeezed my shoulder and didn't say a word. At the time, I thought it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever witnessed. A dying man recognizing kindness. A friend who deserved that recognition. "Better than most," he said. He had no idea. The weeks that followed were a rhythm. Not a good rhythm, not a song you'd choose to listen to, more like the rhythm of a machine. Repetitive, mechanical, necessary. Wake up, drive to Dad's, check the oxygen, check the meds, drive to CVS, drive back, sit with Dad, sit with Delaney, fall asleep in the chair, do it again. Delaney was there almost every evening. She had her own key to Dad's house by then, which sounds strange when I say it now, but at the time it made perfect sense. She'd offered to come by earlier on days when I had a full shift at CVS, and I couldn't always be there to let her in, and Dad couldn't get to the door anymore. So I gave her the spare key from under the ceramic frog on the front step, the one Dad kept there since 2009. She let herself in, made Dad his broth, sat with him, read him the paper, and had everything settled by the time I arrived. It was easier that way, one less thing to worry about. She started bringing biscuits sometimes. The cat would sit on the floor next to Dad's recliner and stare at him with that singular expression of judgment that only cats can produce. Dad, who had never liked cats, who had once told me that cats were just small, furry landlords who don't pay rent, somehow developed an attachment to Biscuit. He'd reach down and scratch behind his ears, and Biscuit would tolerate it for exactly 90 seconds before walking away, which Dad found hilarious. "That cat and I have the same approach to socializing," he said one evening. "Show up, stick around, just long enough to be polite, then leave." In early November, Delaney took me to a coffee shop on Hennepin Avenue, a place called Spy House, one of those Minneapolis coffee shops with exposed brick and baristas who look like they're in a band and probably are. She ordered me a lavender latte. "Trust me," she said, "you need it." And then, very quietly, she started crying. "I'm sorry," she said. She pressed her fingers against her eyes the way people do when they're trying to physically hold the tears in. "I don't want to make this about me. You have so much going on." "But Kyle, he's fighting me on the final divorce settlement. My lawyer says I might owe him an additional $12,000 on top of the debt I'm already carrying. $12,000, Corinne. I don't even know how I'm going to make my condo payment next month. I'm looking at my bank account and it's just numbers that keep getting smaller." Her hands were shaking around the coffee cup. I could see it, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way the latte sloshed just barely against the rim. I reached across the table. "Let me help. I have a little in my personal savings. Travis and I keep separate checking accounts. Long story. I could lend you." "No!" She grabbed my hand, both hands actually, wrapping her fingers around mine with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Dolo, no. Absolutely not. You have enough going on. You're taking care of your dad. You're barely sleeping. You're fighting with CVS about your schedule. The last thing you need is to be worrying about my financial mess on top of everything else. Delaney, I'll figure it out. I always do. She squeezed my fingers and gave me this smile, this watery, shaky, grateful smile that made her look about 10 years younger and about 100 years tired at the same time. And then she said the thing that I will never, as long as I live, be able to unhear. You're a better friend than I deserve. Corinne Aldridge. My heart broke for her. It just broke. Here was this woman who showed up at my father's house every single night, who organized my paperwork and fed my dad and read him baseball scores and held his hand while I fell apart, and she was sitting in a coffee shop telling me she couldn't afford her rent while refusing to let me help. If that's not friendship, I don't know what is. Or at least I thought it was. Around the same time, Biscuit had a dental extraction, 3 teeth, pulled under general anesthesia, which cost Delaney $1,100 she didn't have. The cat came home wearing one of those plastic cones and looking personally offended by the entire medical profession. Delaney posted a photo of him on her phone and showed it to me, and we both laughed for about 4 minutes straight, which was the longest I'd laughed since April. Even with the vet bills, even with Kyle's lawyers, even with her condo payment hanging over her head like a guillotine, Delaney still came to Dad's house every single evening. She'd drive from her condo in Uptown to Lyndale Avenue, spend 3 hours helping me, drive home, take care of a cone-wearing cat on pain medication, and do it again the next night. I remember sitting at Dad's kitchen table one evening, watching her reorganize a stack of medical billing statements with color-coded tabs, and thinking, this woman is a better friend than I deserve. An absolute saint. She is giving me everything she has, and she has almost nothing, and she keeps giving anyway. Anita equivalent at CVS was Pam. Pam, who had been watching me deteriorate for months with the quiet concern of someone who's seen enough of life to recognize when something isn't right. One afternoon in the break room, while I was eating a Snickers she'd slipped into my locker, she said something that I dismissed entirely. You've got a lot of people helping you, right? She was stirring her coffee slowly. Delaney seems like she's really in the middle of everything. I took it as a compliment. She's been incredible, I said. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without her. Pam nodded. She sipped her coffee. She looked at me for about 2 seconds longer than normal. Then she said, and went back to the pharmacy counter. That lived in the back of my head for months. I didn't know why at the time. It was just a sound, 2 syllables. But there was something in it, a texture, a weight, that didn't match the casual delivery, like she was saying one thing with her mouth and something entirely different with her gut. I ignored it. I had a father to take care of, and a brother who wouldn't show up, and a legal battle that hadn't started yet but was already gathering like a storm on the other side of the horizon. November pressed on. The days got shorter, the nights got colder, Dad got thinner, and Delaney kept showing up, kept organizing, kept helping, kept holding my hand while the world tilted sideways. She was right, about what she said at the coffee shop. She was a better friend than I deserved. Just not the way I thought. Dad died on a Tuesday in January of 2025. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final speech, no last-minute miracle, no swelling orchestra in the background. It was just quiet. The oxygen machine that had been humming and clicking in the corner of the living room for 5 months. The machine I'd stopped hearing because it had become as constant as the refrigerator, as the furnace, as my own breathing. That machine clicked once, then stopped. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. I was holding his hand. His fingers were thin by then, almost translucent. I could see the veins underneath, blue-green lines running across the back of his hand like rivers on a map. He weighed 109 pounds. A man who'd spent 35 years carrying pipe wrenches and cast-iron fittings up and down basement stairs. A man who'd once lifted the back end of a riding mower to change a blade because he didn't feel like getting the jack. That man weighed 109 pounds at the end. Delaney was in the chair by the window. She'd been there since 7 that morning. She'd brought coffee and a thermos of broth that nobody drank and a blanket from my apartment that she'd somehow gotten from Travis before he left for Kansas City 2 days earlier. She was reading the newspaper. Not out loud, just reading, being present, being there. Sandra was adjusting the IV line. the one that didn't matter anymore. She looked at the monitor, then at me, and her eyes said everything her mouth didn't. She took off her reading glasses, the ones on the beaded chain, and set them on the nightstand next to the last 2 peppermints she'd left that morning. I don't remember the next part very well. I remember Sandra saying something about time of death. I remember Delaney's hand on my shoulder. I remember looking at the oxygen machine and thinking that someone should probably unplug it, and then thinking that unplugging it meant it was real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real yet. I remember driving home. Or rather, I don't remember driving home, which is different and worse. One moment I was in my father's living room, and the next I was pulling into my own driveway, and I have no memory of the 11 minutes in between. 14 minutes. I must have hit the light on Lyndale and 36th. Travis wasn't there. He was in Kansas City, 6 hours south, hauling a load of HVAC units for a hospital renovation. He'd wanted to cancel the run. He'd told his dispatcher the week before that his father-in-law was in the final days, and could someone else take the route? Nobody could. Short-staffed, holiday schedules. The trucks don't stop. He called me from a rest stop outside of Des Moines. I know it was Des Moines because I could hear the interstate in the background, and he told me later he'd pulled over so fast he'd jackknifed the trailer slightly and had to spend 10 minutes straightening it out before he could drive again. "I'm coming home," he said. His voice was the kind of steady that takes effort, the kind of steady that means someone is holding it together with both hands. "I'm leaving now. I'll be there by midnight." "Okay. Viv." He never calls me Viv. That's what my father called me when I was little, before I told him I was too old for nicknames, which he ignored completely and kept calling me Viv until the day he couldn't call me anything anymore. Travis called me Corinne. Always. Except that one time. "Viv, I'm so sorry." He got home at 12:40. I was sitting on the kitchen floor, not for any particular reason. I just couldn't make it to the couch. The floor was closer. The linoleum was cold through my scrubs. I was still wearing my scrubs from CVS, the blue ones with the little pharmacy logo on the pocket. I'd gone straight from work to Dad's house that morning and never changed. There was a coffee stain on the left knee from 4 days ago that I hadn't noticed until right then. Travis walked in and found me on the floor, and he didn't say a word. He sat down next to me in his work jacket that smelled like diesel and road salt and cold highway air, and he put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, and we sat there on the kitchen floor for a long time. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough for the refrigerator to cycle on and off twice. Long enough for me to realize that I needed to call Trent, and then to realize that I couldn't, not yet, not right now, maybe tomorrow, maybe never. The next 3 weeks were what I'd call casserole time. If you've ever lost someone in a mid-sized Midwestern city like Minneapolis, you know exactly what I mean. People show up with food, hot dish and meatloaf and Jell-O salad and a lasagna from the woman at Dad's old church who I'd met exactly once. Foil-covered dishes and Tupperware containers with masking tape labels and Ziploc bags of homemade cookies that someone's grandmother made. Our refrigerator was so full that Travis started stacking containers on the back porch because it was January in Minneapolis and negative 15 degrees, which meant the entire state of Minnesota was functioning as a secondary refrigerator. Dad's house on Lyndale Avenue sat empty. I couldn't go inside for the first 5 days. The thought of walking through that front door and not hearing the oxygen machine, not smelling the menthol cough drops he kept in a dish on the kitchen counter, not seeing him in the recliner with the newspaper on his lap, it was too much. The absence of a person is somehow louder than their presence ever was. On day 6, I drove there. I sat in the driveway with the engine running and the heat blasting, and I stared at the front door for 20 minutes. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand inside. I knew because I'd left them there on purpose. Like maybe he'd come back for them. Like maybe this was all just a long nap and he'd wake up and put them on and pick up his crossword puzzle and ask me why I looked so tired. A half-finished crossword puzzle in blue ink sat on the kitchen table next to a coffee mug with a faded picture of a walleye on it. The mug said "Gone Fishin'," and Dad thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. He'd bought 4 of them. 1 for the kitchen, 1 for the garage, 1 for the truck, and 1 he gave to Sandra because she'd mentioned once that she liked fishing, which she didn't. But she kept the mug anyway because that's the kind of person Sandra was. The refrigerator still hummed. The notes were still there. 37 fish magnets holding up index cards in blue ink. His handwriting, his voice frozen on paper. And somewhere behind that refrigerator, in the gap between the back and the wall, a note I'd never picked up was collecting dust. I sat in the driveway until the gas gauge started blinking. Then I drove home and didn't go back for another week. The funeral was on a Thursday, January 16th. Luther Memorial Church on Portland Avenue, a stone building with stained glass windows that turned the winter light into something that almost looked warm. I mentioned the church only as a location, not as a statement about anything. It was the church Dad went to exactly twice a year, Christmas and Easter, which he called keeping his options open. The pews were about half full, which for a 64-year-old retired plumber in South Minneapolis is honestly a solid turnout. The plumbers came. 3 of them from his old crew, men with thick hands and work boots they'd clearly polished for the occasion. One of them, a guy named Hank Olerud, who'd worked with Dad for 19 years, brought a card signed by 22 people I'd never met. 22 people who knew my father through pipes and fittings and emergency calls at 2 in the morning when someone's basement was flooding. 22 people who wrote things like "best guy I ever worked with," and he fixed our kitchen sink in 1998, and it still works. That card is in my nightstand drawer. I'll keep it forever. Trent showed up. He drove from Denver with Megan and the kids, and I know he drove because he mentioned the mileage twice, like the distance itself was supposed to count for something. He wore a dark suit that still had the price tag sticking out at the collar. I could see it when he hugged me, a little white rectangle dangling against the back of his neck, which tells you exactly how much thought went into the trip. You drive 900 miles to bury your father, and you don't check the mirror before you walk into the church. Megan stood near the back, holding her phone in a way that I've come to recognize as about to take a photo, and she did. She took a selfie, in front of the church, at my father's funeral. She posted it, then deleted it about 4 minutes later, which I know because Pam saw it before it disappeared, and screenshot it and texted it to me 2 days later with no caption. Just the image. Megan in a black coat, half smiling, the church sign visible over her left shoulder. I stared at that screenshot for a long time, then I put my phone in a drawer and didn't look at it for a week. Their son, Mason, who was 8, sat in the pew and played a game on a tablet with the sound barely muted. I could hear tiny digital explosions during the scripture reading. Nobody said anything. And then there was Harper. Harper was 5. She had her father's eyes and her mother's complete inability to read a room, except in Harper's case it wasn't inability, it was innocence. She walked up to me before the service started, in a little black dress that was slightly too big and white tights that had a grass stain on one knee from God knows what, and she took my hand. Her fingers were so small they barely wrapped around 2 of mine. "Aunt Corinne," she said, looking up at me with those enormous brown eyes, "when is Grandpa waking up?" I have been asked a lot of difficult questions in my life. Insurance companies have asked me to explain deductibles to angry customers. Doctors have asked me to make decisions about my father's care that no daughter should have to make. A judge would eventually ask me to sign papers that determined who got what from a dead man's estate. But nothing has ever hit me as hard as a 5-year-old girl asking me when her grandfather was going to wake up. I knelt down. The floor was cold through my stockings. "Grandpa's resting now, sweetheart. He's resting for a really long time." She nodded, very seriously, the way children do when they're processing something too large for their vocabulary. Then she said, "Can he rest at our house? We have a spare room." I almost lost it right there in the vestibule of Luther Memorial Church with 22 plumbers and a woman who just deleted a funeral selfie sitting 30 feet away. Trent cried during the eulogy. I'll give him that. He stood 3 rows behind me and I could hear him. Whether it was grief or guilt or performance, I genuinely couldn't tell. And 14 months later, I'm still not sure. But he cried. And the people around us saw a grieving son. And that was the story he needed them to see. Delaney stood next to me the entire service. She had tissues in her left coat pocket, breath mints in her right pocket, and a bottle of water in her purse that she kept offering me every 10 minutes, like she was running a hydration checkpoint. She'd made 3 trays of hot dish that morning, her grandmother's recipe, the one with the tater tots crimped around the edges in that specific way that takes twice as long but looks twice as good. She'd dropped them at my house at 6 in the morning before the service. That woman showed up for me in a way that nobody else did. Not Trent, not Megan, not even Travis, who tried, bless him, but Travis's idea of emotional support is fixing something in the garage and hoping you feel better by the time he's done. He'd spent the morning before the funeral replacing the weather stripping on the back door because he said there was a draft, and I think he genuinely believed that sealing the draft would somehow seal the grief too. That's Travis. Find the leak, fix the leak. If only people worked like plumbing. Part of me, the ugly part, the part I don't like to look at directly, wanted Trent to suffer. I wanted him to feel even 1% of what those 8 months felt like. The 3 a.m. oxygen alarms. The smell of menthol and medical tape that I couldn't wash out of my jacket. The afternoon I had to sign a do not resuscitate form with a pen that wouldn't stop shaking in my hand. I wanted him to feel the weight of that pen. Is that terrible? Probably. Did I care? Not even a little. Okay, hold on, I need to stop for a second. I got a comment on my last story from someone in Auckland, New Zealand, and she said she was listening at 3 a.m. because she couldn't sleep. 3 a.m. That's commitment. So, if you're watching this right now, hit subscribe if you haven't already. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I see every single one. I read them all. It honestly makes my entire day. Thank you. So, where was I? Right. The funeral. The food. The grief. 3 weeks after the funeral, Trent called. We need to talk about Dad's estate. Just like that. No, how are you holding up? No, I've been thinking about you. No, I'm sorry, I wasn't there for 8 months while you watched our father dissolve. Just the estate. Like he was calling about a late Amazon package. I looked out the kitchen window. Snow was falling. Thin, dry Minnesota snow. The kind that doesn't stick to anything except your eyelashes and your mood. Yeah, I said. I guess we do. Dad had a will. He'd had it drawn up in 2022 by a lawyer he found through his union rep, and he'd updated it in early 2024, right after the diagnosis, right after the word aggressive, right after he sat in that truck with Johnny Cash on the tape deck and told me not to tell Trent yet. He'd gone to the lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning, by himself, without telling anyone, and signed the updated document with a pen that was still steady. Blue ink. Because pencils were for people who didn't commit. The will was straightforward. 70% of the estate to me, Corinne Aldridge, as the primary caregiver who had been there every single day for 8 months. 30% to Trent. 70-30. The estate was bigger than I'd expected. Not because my father was wealthy. He wasn't. He was a plumber who drove a 30-year-old truck and wore the same 3 pairs of work boots in rotation until the soles wore through. But he was careful. He was steady. And he was a man who'd worked since he was 17 and spent less than he earned every single year for 47 years. The house on Lyndale Avenue. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, detached garage with the door that stuck. County assessment had it at $298,000, which for South Minneapolis in 2025 was about right. Not a mansion, not a teardown, just a house that a man had lived in for 31 years and maintained with his own hands because that's what he did. 2 savings accounts, one at First Hennepin Bank with about $52,000, one at a credit union on Lake Street with roughly $11,000, a term life insurance policy through his union worth $40,000, the Ford F-150, 1978, cherry red, fully restored. I'd looked up comparable sales online. A truck in that condition, that year, that model, was worth somewhere between $30,000 and $38,000. Call it $35,000. His fishing gear, rods, reels, tackle boxes, a 14-foot aluminum boat on a trailer that he kept at a buddy's property in Chanhassen. Outdoor equipment, together, maybe $8,000. Altogether, roughly $433,000. That's not rich people money. But it's change your life money when you're an assistant manager at a CVS making $48,000 a year and your husband drives trucks and your combined savings wouldn't cover 3 months of mortgage payments if something went wrong. Trent didn't like the split. That's putting it mildly. Trent hated the split with every fiber of his being. I deserve half, he said on the phone. His voice had that particular tightness that means someone has rehearsed what they're about to say. I'm still his son. You don't get extra credit for showing up. I stood in my kitchen. It was 9:30 at night. Travis was in the shower. The faucet in the bathroom, the one I'd fixed with 2 YouTube videos and a stripped bolt, was making a faint dripping sound that meant my repair job was already failing. I was there every day for 8 months, Trent. And I'm sorry about that. I am. But I couldn't handle it. You know I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it either, I said. I just didn't have a choice. The line went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. The kind where you can hear someone's jaw working, chewing on words they haven't decided to say yet. Then he said it. I'm getting a lawyer. I'm taking everything if I have to. He hung up. The faucet dripped. The furnace kicked on. And I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone and wondering how a man who couldn't be bothered to remove a price tag from his suit jacket at his own father's funeral was going to find a lawyer. He found one. Dale Pemberton, based in Denver. His billboard had a picture of him pointing at the camera like a used car salesman at a 4th of July sale, and his website said he specialized in personal injury, auto accidents, and general civil litigation. I am not a lawyer, but I'm fairly confident that probate law in Minnesota is not general civil litigation, real confidence inspiring. Delaney helped me find a probate attorney. Leonard Kessler, semi-retired, 30 years of estate work. His office was on Nicolade Avenue in a building that smelled like old paper and aftershave and had a radiator that clanked every 8 minutes. Leonard had white hair, a bow tie, and the demeanor of a man who had seen every possible version of family dysfunction and was no longer surprised by any of it. He looked at the will. He looked at the asset list. He looked at me over his reading glasses, which were not on a beaded chain like Sandra's but balanced on the very tip of his nose in a way that seemed to defy physics. This is clean, he said. Your brother can contest, but he'll spend a lot of money losing. Delaney went with me to that first appointment. She sat in the waiting room and read a 2-year-old copy of People magazine. When I came out, she said, "So are we good?" I said, "I think so." She hugged me. Right there in the hallway of Leonard Kessler's office, next to a fake plant that was collecting dust and a framed print of Lake Superior, she hugged me and said, "Good. Because you deserve this, Corinne. You were there." He wasn't. Period. I wanted to believe it was that simple. Trent filed a formal challenge the following week, claiming undue influence, basically arguing that I'd manipulated Dad into writing the will in my favor while Trent was conveniently absent. The irony of that nearly made me choke on my morning coffee. He wasn't there because he chose not to be there, and now he was arguing that I'd taken advantage of his absence. I couldn't make this up if I tried. His lawyer sent Leonard a 6-page letter demanding 50% of all assets. The letter referenced 3 Minnesota probate statutes, 2 of which Leonard said were cited incorrectly. "This man is not a probate attorney," Leonard told me over the phone, and I could practically hear him rubbing his temples through the receiver. He's an ambulance chaser from Denver who Googled Minnesota estate law and hoped for the best. Despite Leonard's confidence, the contest meant more hearings, more paperwork, more time with everything frozen. The estate couldn't move forward until the court resolved the challenge. The house sat empty. The bank accounts sat untouched. The insurance payout sat in legal limbo, and both sides were bleeding attorney fees while the money just existed, somewhere, doing nothing, belonging to no one. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, quiet as a hum you stop noticing, Delaney kept organizing. Delaney offered to help with the house appraisal. "I know people in real estate," she said. "Insurance adjusters work with appraisers all the time. I can get someone to do a proper valuation so the court has a real number." The appraisal came back at $298,000, which matched the county assessment almost exactly. That felt right. A 3-bedroom rambler in South Minneapolis, solid bones, original kitchen, detached garage with a door that stuck. $298. No surprises. Delaney said she'd gotten the appraiser to do it at a reduced rate as a professional courtesy. "Consider it a favor," she said. "I've referred him enough business over the years. He owes me one." I didn't question it. Why would I? My best friend, who worked in a field adjacent to real estate, who dealt with property valuations every day for her job, had used a professional connection to save me money during the most difficult period of my life. That's not suspicious. That's friendship. She also offered to help organize the estate paperwork. And by offered, I mean she showed up at my kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with a box of colored file folders, a label maker, and a bag of mini pretzels, and said, "We're doing this tonight. Where are the bank statements?" We spent 2 evenings at my kitchen table sorting through everything: bank statements, insurance documents, tax returns. The folder of receipts Dad kept in a shoebox labeled "Important" in capital letters with a black Sharpie. Inside were 30 years of receipts for everything from plumbing supplies to oil changes to a $12 subscription to a fishing magazine that he'd apparently been paying for since 2003. Delaney organized it all. She separated the documents into categories: color-coded tabs, red for banking, blue for insurance, green for property, yellow for miscellaneous. She made a spreadsheet on her laptop, cross-referencing account numbers and dates and balances. She worked with the focused precision of someone who did this for a living, which she did. "You're dealing with financial documents and legal filings," she said, not looking up from the spreadsheet. "This is literally my world. Insurance claims, damage assessments, policy reconciliations. Same skill set, different application. Let me handle the organization so you can focus on the legal strategy with Leonard." It made sense. It made perfect sense. One person with eyes on everything, so nothing fell through the cracks. She'd said it before, she said it again, and it still sounded like the most logical thing in the world. At one point, going through the first Hennepin Bank statements, I found something that made me pause. August 2024. A withdrawal for $750. No description. No payee. Just a debit. $750. Pulled from the account like someone had reached in and taken it. I held the statement up. "What's this?" Delaney glanced at it, barely glanced, the way you'd look at a grocery receipt that fell out of a bag. Your dad probably had auto-pay set up for something, medical supply company maybe, or one of those prescription delivery services. Happens all the time with older people on long-term treatment. They sign up for things and forget about them. She went back to the spreadsheet. Click, click, click. The cursor moving from cell to cell. "You can call the bank later and check," she said, "but I wouldn't worry about it." I nodded. Put the statement back in the red folder. Moved on. $750. I moved on. A few days later, at CVS, I was restocking the cold medicine aisle because it was February in Minneapolis and everyone in the city had the same sinus infection. Pam found me crouched between shelves of Dayquil and Sudafed, sticking price tags on boxes with the kind of methodical focus that comes from not wanting to think about anything else. She had 2 coffees. She handed me one. We sat on the floor of aisle 7, because Pam is the kind of person who will sit on the floor of a pharmacy aisle with you and not care who sees. "How's the estate stuff going?" she asked. Slowly. "Leonard says we're in a good position, but Trent's lawyer keeps filing motions. It's like trying to walk through mud." She nodded, sipped her coffee. "You've got Delaney helping you with all the paperwork, right? She's been incredible. I honestly don't know what I'd do without her. She's organized everything, color-coded, spreadsheets. She even got the house appraised through one of her contacts." Pam was quiet for a moment. She looked at her coffee cup. Then she looked at me. "Delaney seems like she's really in the middle of everything." I took it as a compliment. She is. She really is. I don't think I could have gotten through this without her. Pam nodded slowly. She looked at me for about 2 seconds longer than felt natural. Then she said, and took a long sip of her coffee and didn't say anything else. That sound again. That, 2 syllables carrying a weight that didn't match their size. I heard it. I registered it somewhere in the back of my brain, in the room where you store things you're not ready to look at yet. And then I closed the door on that room and went back to sticking price tags on Dayquil. Delaney had seen every bank statement, every insurance policy, every tax return, every piece of paper connected to my father's financial life. She knew the account numbers, the balances, the beneficiary designations. She'd organized it all into those neat, color-coded folders that sat on my kitchen table like a library of my father's legacy. She had access to everything. And I thought that made me lucky. I thought that was the universe throwing me a lifeline in the middle of a hurricane, a best friend who happened to have exactly the right skills at exactly the right time. Because that's what you do when someone brings you hot dish every night and holds your dying father's hand and cries with you in a coffee shop and tells you she can't afford her own rent but refuses to take your money. You trust them. You hand them the keys. You hand them the documents. You hand them every piece of information they could possibly need, and you believe them. Leonard called on a Friday afternoon in late February. I was at CVS, restocking the vitamin aisle, which is the kind of mindless work that lets your brain wander to all the places you don't want it to go. My phone vibrated in my scrubs pocket. I stepped into the back hallway, the one that leads to the loading dock and smells like cardboard and hand sanitizer, and answered. "Corinne, I've been going through the probate filings, cross-referencing the asset list with county records. Leonard's voice had that particular flatness he used when he was about to deliver information he didn't like. "There's a second mortgage on the house." I leaned against the wall. "That's not possible." $25,000, taken out in August of 2024, through a private lender called North Star Capital Partners. August of 2024, when Dad was in and out of consciousness, when he couldn't hold a wrench, when he could barely sign his own name without his hand trembling like a leaf in a wind tunnel. "Dad wouldn't take out a second mortgage," I said. "He hated debt. He paid off the original mortgage in 2019 and threw a party. He made a cake. A grown man made a sheet cake from a box mix and wrote, 'Free at last' on it with store-bought frosting. Leonard, he threw a party." Leonard said the mortgage was issued through a small, private lending outfit, the kind that operates on referrals, not advertisements. The documentation included a power of attorney form. Someone had signed on Walter's behalf. My brain went straight to Trent. It had to be Trent. He was the only other family. He had access to Dad's information. Social security number, date of birth, all of it. He probably used some contact in Denver, or maybe Megan had a connection. She worked in marketing for a real estate development company. She knew people. I called Delaney that evening. I was sitting in my Honda Civic in the CVS parking lot with the heat on because I couldn't face driving home yet. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. "It's Trent," I said. "He took out a mortgage on Dad's house while Dad was dying." Delaney's response was immediate. "Of course it was Trent. He had access to your dad's information. And Megan works in real estate, right? She probably knows someone at a private lender. This is exactly the kind of thing they would do." Her voice was steady, certain, the voice of someone who had already reached the obvious conclusion and was waiting for you to catch up. "You need to tell Leonard," she said. "This changes everything. If Trent forged a power of attorney while your father was incapacitated, that's not just a probate issue. That's fraud." She was right. It did change everything. I told Leonard. Leonard said he'd investigate. And then I spent the next 2 weeks trying to prove that my brother had stolen $25,000 from our dying father. 2 weeks of phone calls. I called North Star Capital Partners and got a voicemail that sounded like it had been recorded in a bathroom. I called the Hennepin County Recorder's office and sat on hold for 3 hours while they played the same 45 seconds of jazz piano on a loop. I called the number on the mortgage document and reached a woman who said she couldn't release any information without a court order, and then hung up like I'd asked her for a kidney. Every lead went nowhere. Dead end after dead end after dead end. And Trent denied it. Of course he denied it. But here's the thing that kept me awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling while Travis snored beside me and the furnace clicked on and off in the basement. Trent's denials didn't sound the way I expected them to. When Trent lies, and I've known him for 33 years, so I know what Trent lying sounds like, he gets defensive, loud, he talks fast, repeats himself, throws in unnecessary details. That's Trent lying. This wasn't that. When I asked him about the mortgage, his voice got quiet, confused, almost hurt. "I didn't do that, Cor," he said, and for about 3 seconds I believed him. Then I reminded myself who I was talking to, the man who posted ski photos while Dad was on oxygen, the man who called about the estate 3 weeks after the funeral like he was inquiring about a late package, the man who said, "You don't get extra credit for showing up." I shook it off. It had to be him. There was nobody else. One evening in early March, I went to Dad's house to continue cleaning it out. The place had been sitting mostly untouched since January. The crossword puzzle was still on the table. The gone fishin' mug was still next to it. The coffee can of fishing lures still sat on top of the refrigerator, and it still rattled when I opened the freezer. I was going through the kitchen drawers, the kind of drawers that every house has, the ones full of rubber bands and expired coupons and takeout menus from restaurants that closed in 2017. And underneath a tangle of twist ties and a dead battery and a refrigerator magnet in the shape of a largemouth bass that had lost its magnetic backing, I found a note, Dad's handwriting. Shaky. Late stage shaky. Blue ink, barely legible, the letters leaning sideways like they were tired. It said, D, spare key. Do not. And then it stopped, cut off, like he'd run out of strength mid-sentence, or been interrupted, or simply couldn't hold the pen any longer. D. I stared at that letter. D for Denver. Trent lived in Denver. Dad was warning me about Trent having a spare key. Maybe Trent had come to the house without telling anyone and taken documents or copied account information. That's what it had to mean. I put the note in the shoebox, the one labeled important in Sharpie. I showed it to Delaney the next day. She was at my kitchen table, updating the spreadsheet, a glass of wine from Target next to her laptop. She looked at the note the way she'd looked at the $750 withdrawal, briefly, dismissively. The way you look at something you've already categorized as unimportant. Your dad was probably just being paranoid about Trent having a key to the house, she said. Old people write strange things when they're sick. My grandmother used to leave notes about the mailman stealing her newspaper. It never happened. She went back to the spreadsheet. Click, click, click. I put the note back in the shoebox. I put the shoebox back on the counter, and I went to bed with a headache that had taken up permanent residence behind my right eye like a tenant who refused to pay rent. D for Denver. That's what I thought. I was wrong. The estate was frozen. Trent's lawyer had filed a motion to freeze all assets until the court could sort out the will contest, which meant I couldn't sell the house, couldn't access the savings accounts, couldn't touch the insurance payout. Everything was locked in legal amber. Both sides were bleeding attorney fees, while the money just sat there, belonging to nobody, helping nobody, existing in some bureaucratic purgatory between a dead man's wishes and a living man's greed. Leonard's fees were manageable. He billed monthly, clean invoices, no surprises. But manageable isn't the same as affordable when your take-home pay is $3,700 a month and your mortgage is $1,400 and your car payment is $280 and the grocery bill keeps climbing because, apparently, eggs now cost the same as a minor medical procedure. Travis and I were coming apart at the seams. My husband is a good man. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Travis Aldridge shows love by checking tire pressure and replacing windshield wipers before a storm and making sure the smoke detectors have fresh batteries every October. He fixes things. That's his language. Leaky faucet? Fixed by Saturday. Weird noise in the car? Diagnosed and repaired before I even finished describing the sound. Wife slowly disintegrating under the weight of grief and a legal battle and a stolen mortgage and a brother who won't stop calling and a best friend who keeps showing up with hot dish and spreadsheets? He didn't know where to put his hands for that one. He came home on a Tuesday night to find me surrounded by bank statements and legal files at the kitchen table. It was 11 at night. I had a cold cup of coffee, 3 highlighters, and a spiral notebook full of numbers that weren't adding up. I hadn't eaten dinner. I'd barely spoken to him in 3 days. Corinne. He stood in the doorway, still in his work jacket, grease on his collar from whatever truck he'd been under that day. This is eating you alive. You need to step back. I didn't look up. I'm close to something. The numbers from August don't match the... You've been close to something for 3 weeks. You come home from work, you sit at this table, Delaney comes over, you two go through papers until midnight, and then you sleep for 4 hours and do it again. At least Delaney is helping. I watched that land. I watched his jaw tighten and his hands go into his pockets, which is what Travis does instead of yelling. He's never raised his voice at me, not once in 7 years. But the jaw thing and the pockets thing? That's Travis at full volume. He nodded once. Then he went to the bedroom and closed the door. I heard the television turn on. Some truck auction show he watches when he doesn't trust himself to speak. He slept on the couch that night, I think. I don't actually know because I fell asleep at the kitchen table with my face on a bank statement from October and woke up at 5:15 with an account number imprinted on my cheek. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Red eyes. Account number on my face. Hair that hadn't been properly washed in a quantity of days I preferred not to calculate. I was 33 years old and I looked like a woman who'd been living in a library during a natural disaster. At CVS, Dr. Wynn called me into the back office again. This time she had a form, an official form, the kind with boxes and signatures and a line at the bottom that says, Employee Acknowledgement. 3 late arrivals this month, she said, reading from the printout without looking at me. 2 full missed days. And last Thursday, one of the technicians found you in the stockroom sitting on a crate of cough syrup, staring at the wall for approximately 15 minutes. I didn't remember that last one. I genuinely did not remember sitting on a crate of cough syrup. My brain had started doing this thing where it would just leave for a while, like a tenant stepping out for cigarettes and not coming back for an hour. "Corinne, I like you," she said. "You've been here 4 years. You're good at your job when you're present, but I have a pharmacy to run, and I need someone at that desk who is consistent." "I know," I said. "And I'm sorry. I know it's been bad, but the estate is almost settled. The legal stuff is wrapping up. I'm asking for 1 more month. 1 month and I'll be back to normal. I promise." She looked at me over her glasses. She sighed. The Dr. Nguyen's sigh. The one that carries the weight of prescription counts and insurance disputes and a pharmacy floor that doesn't run itself. 1 month, she said. That's it. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just bench-pressed a Buick. It was the first thing I'd won in months, and it wasn't even a win. It was a reprieve. But I took it. Meanwhile, Delaney made some calls about the second mortgage. She said she had contacts in the insurance and real estate world, appraisers, title agents, loan officers, people who knew people. A few days later, she called me. "I couldn't find anything concrete," she said, "but it definitely looks like it was done through a private lender, the kind of outfit that doesn't ask too many questions. Trent probably used a contact. Maybe Megan knows someone through her real estate marketing work. It fits." I wanted to believe her, so I did. That night, Travis came home and found me at the kitchen table again. Same table, same papers, different cold cup of coffee. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he walked past me, opened the refrigerator, stared at the contents for about 30 seconds without taking anything out, closed it, and went to the garage. I heard the toolbox open. I heard a socket wrench clicking. He was going to fix something. That's what Travis does when the world stops making sense. He finds a bolt that's loose, and he tightens it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about the couch or the kitchen table or the bank statements or the account number on my cheek. We just kept moving. 2 people in the same house, orbiting the same grief, barely touching. The faucet in the bathroom started dripping again. The one I'd fixed 8 months ago with 2 YouTube videos and a stripped bolt. Travis fixed it in 11 minutes. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to. The break happened on a Wednesday, not a poetic Wednesday, not a meaningful one. Just a regular, nothing special, middle of March Wednesday where the sky was that flat Minnesota gray that makes everything look like the inside of a filing cabinet. I had just left CVS. Clocked out 14 minutes early because Pam covered the last quarter hour and told me to go home. She did not say why. She did not have to. I had spent the last 40 minutes staring at an inventory screen without entering a single number, and when a customer asked where the children's Tylenol was, I pointed to the wrong aisle. Twice. I did not go home. I pulled into the Target parking lot on Lake Street, the one near the Chipotle, and I parked in the back row near the cart return. Engine running, heat on. Hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, like someone had just asked me to demonstrate proper driving posture for a learner's permit exam. And then I cried. Not the kind of crying you see in movies, where someone puts their hand over their mouth and a single tear rolls down and they look beautiful and tragic. This was the ugly kind. The kind where your whole face folds in on itself and your breathing sounds like a broken vacuum cleaner and snot gets on the steering wheel and you do not care. I cried so hard I fogged up the windshield. I cried so hard my ribs hurt. I cried until I ran out of crying, and then I sat there with the engine running and the heat blasting and stared at the red Target logo through the fog on the glass and thought about frozen pizza rolls. That is what grief does, by the way. It does not always make you think about the person you lost. Sometimes it makes you think about pizza rolls, or laundry, or whether you remembered to switch the water bill to auto-pay. It flattens everything into the same dull weight, and you cannot tell which thought matters and which one is just your brain trying to find something small enough to hold. I sat there for 22 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock said 3:47 when I parked and 4:09 when my phone rang. It was a FaceTime from Travis, except it was not Travis. It was Harper. She was sitting on the couch in her pajamas, the ones with the little strawberries. Her hair was in 2 uneven pigtails, which meant Travis had done them, and one side was noticeably higher than the other. She was holding the phone too close to her face, the way 5-year-olds do, so I could see every freckle on her nose and the gap where her bottom tooth used to be. "Mommy," she said, "are you coming home?" "Soon, baby." "Are you at Grandpa's house?" "No, I'm at Target." "Oh." She tilted the phone. I could see the living room ceiling fan. Daddy made waffles, but they are the frozen kind. That is okay. He burned one. That is also okay. She tilted the phone back. Her face filled the screen again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mommy, are you mean?" I blinked. "What?" "Mason said you are mean. He said you took all of Grandpa's stuff and that is why Uncle Trent is mad." I felt my chest tighten. Mason, 8 years old, Megan's son, repeating whatever Megan and Trent had said at their dinner table in Denver, probably between bites of takeout pad thai and complaints about airline miles. "I am not mean, Harper." "I know," she said. And then, without any pause, without any dramatic build-up, she said, "Can I have tater tots?" I laughed. It came out of nowhere. It was not a big laugh. It was the kind that sneaks out the side of your mouth before you can stop it, and it surprised me more than it surprised her. She grinned, and the gap in her teeth made the grin wider, and for about 4 seconds, the entire world was just a 5-year-old in strawberry pajamas asking for tater tots. "Yes," I said, "you can have tater tots." I drove home. I made the tater tots. I ate 3 of them standing at the counter while Harper sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, feeding the cat Cheerios, which the cat did not want. Travis leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and watched me and did not say a word, but he had that look, the one where his jaw is set but his eyes are soft, the one that means I see you and I do not know what to do but I am here. That night, after Harper was asleep and the dishes were done and the house was quiet, except for the furnace clicking on every 40 minutes, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I had 17 tabs open. Bank statements, Hennepin County property records, Leonard's last invoice, North Star Capital Partners, a Reddit thread titled, "How do I find out who took a second mortgage on my parents' house?" An ad for meal prep containers I had accidentally clicked on and could not close. I closed all of them. I opened one new tab. I typed Forensic Accountant Minneapolis. The first result was a firm called Greer & Associates, Mitchell Greer, CPA, CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, 19 years of experience, exposed financial fraud, exposed elder abuse, exposed embezzlement in small estates, family trusts, nonprofit boards. His website had a quote on the homepage. It said, "The numbers do not lie, people do." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and scheduled a consultation for Thursday morning, 8:30, before my CVS shift. I did not tell Travis. I did not tell Leonard. I did not tell Delaney. One decision, made in the dark, at a kitchen table covered in crumbs and Cheerios and a half-eaten tater tot. That one decision changed everything. The consultation with Mitchell Greer cost me nothing. He offered the first 30 minutes free, which I later learned is what forensic accountants do when they already know you have a case before you finish your second sentence. His office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Washington Avenue, the kind of building that still has a manual elevator and smells like old carpet and coffee that has been reheated twice. I sat across from him at a desk, covered in manila folders and a single framed photo of a golden retriever. No family photos, just the dog. I liked him immediately. Mitchell Greer was 53, bald on top, gray on the sides, reading glasses on a lanyard that he never actually put on his face. He had the energy of a man who had spent 2 decades watching people lie about money and had long ago stopped being surprised by any of it. He listened to my entire story without interrupting. 22 minutes. I timed it on the clock behind his head because I needed something to focus on besides the fact that my voice kept cracking. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "How many people have access to your father's accounts?" "Just me. And my brother." And Delaney helped organize the statements. He wrote something down. "Who arranged the house appraisal?" Delaney. She had a real estate contact. He wrote something else. "Who first found the $750 withdrawal and said it was probably an auto pay?" Delaney. He did not write anything that time. He just looked at me over the glasses he was not wearing and said, "I will need everything. Bank statements, mortgage documents, insurance paperwork, any communications between your brother's attorney and the court. All of it." I gave him the color-coded folders. Red for banking, blue for insurance, green for property, yellow for miscellaneous. Delaney's system. He looked at the tabs and the labels and the neatly printed spreadsheet and said, "Whoever organized this knew exactly what they were looking at." I did not understand what he meant. Not then. The full forensic audit cost $3,400. I paid it from the joint savings Travis and I kept for emergencies. I did not tell Travis. I did not tell Leonard. I certainly did not tell Delaney. I told myself I would explain later, when I had answers, when I had proof, when the knot in my stomach had a name. 3 weeks passed. Mitchell sent 2 brief emails. Still working. Need another week. I checked my phone between every CVS shift, every Harper bedtime, every silent dinner with Travis. Nothing. Then the call came. It was a Thursday, April 3rd, 2:17 in the afternoon. I was in the supply closet at CVS, the one behind the pharmacy counter that smells like cardboard and hand sanitizer and has a fluorescent light that buzzes at a frequency that makes your teeth itch. I had gone in there to restock ibuprofen. My phone vibrated in my back pocket. "Corinne, it is Mitchell. Do you have a few minutes?" "I am in a supply closet." "That will work." He did not ease into it. He did not soften it. He said it the way a surgeon says the word malignant, direct, clinical, already past the part where feelings matter. 22 unauthorized withdrawals from your father's first Hennepin bank account between August 2024 and January 2025. Amounts ranging from $450 to $1,100. Total, $19,800. The withdrawals were initiated using online banking credentials tied to a secondary authorized user added in July 2024. That user is Delaney Voss. I sat down on a case of cough syrup. The $25,000 second mortgage through Northstar Capital Partners was co-signed using a power of attorney filed with Hennepin County in August 2024. The signature on that power of attorney does not match your father's known signatures. It does match formatting consistent with digital reproduction. The notary listed on the document, a Patricia Elwin, has no record of notarizing that specific filing. The co-signer on the mortgage is Delaney Voss. I pressed my back against the metal shelving unit. A bottle of something fell behind me. I did not pick it up. Your father's 1978 Ford F-150, titled in his name, was sold in November 2024 to a private buyer in Bloomington for $28,000. The title transfer was authorized using the same fraudulent power of attorney. The sale was facilitated through a listing posted by an account linked to Delaney Voss's personal email. I could hear the fluorescent light buzzing. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear Mitchell turning a page. There are also communications, text messages and emails between Delaney Voss and a woman named Megan Aldridge, your brother's wife. The messages date back to September 2024. They discuss the estate, the will, your brother's legal claim, and specific asset values. In one exchange from October, Delaney provided Megan with a breakdown of your father's accounts, including balances she would only have known from the documents you gave her access to. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. "Corinne, the total confirmed misappropriation is $72,800. That is the $19,800 from the bank, the $25,000 from the mortgage, and the $28,000 from the truck sale. There may be more. I am still reviewing the credit union records. $72,800. I sat on that case of cough syrup in the supply closet behind the pharmacy counter at the CVS on Lake Street in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I held the phone against my ear, and I did not move for 6 minutes. I know because when I finally stood up, my phone screen said 2:23. Mitchell said one more thing before he hung up. "The numbers do not lie, Corinne. People do." I walked out of the supply closet. Pam was at the register. She looked at me and said, "You okay?" I said, "I need to go home." She said, "Go." I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone, just the sound of the engine and the windshield wipers because it had started to rain, that cold April rain that cannot decide if it wants to be snow. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for 11 minutes. Then I called Travis. Travis answered on the second ring. He was somewhere on I-94, west of Street Cloud, hauling insulation panels to a warehouse in Fargo. I could hear the diesel engine and the low hum of talk radio in the background. He said, "Hey, what is up?" I said, "I need you to come home." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Travis does not ask unnecessary questions. He has never been the kind of man who needs a paragraph when a sentence will do. He said, "I will turn around at the next exit." He got home at 7:42 that evening. Harper was already in bed. I had put her down early, read her the one about the caterpillar twice because she asked, then sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing went slow and even, and her hand relaxed around the stuffed rabbit she had been holding since she was 2. I was sitting on the bathroom floor when Travis found me. Not because I had collapsed, not because I was crying. I had simply run out of places to sit. The kitchen table had the folders on it. The couch had Harper's blanket and 3 stuffed animals and a half-eaten bag of goldfish crackers. The bedroom felt too big. The bathroom floor was small and cold and tile, and it did not ask me anything. Travis stood in the doorway. He was still in his work jacket. He smelled like diesel and cold highway air and the cinnamon gum he chews on long hauls. He looked at me on the floor and he did not say what happened or, "Are you okay?" or any of the things people say when they find someone sitting on a bathroom floor at 8 o'clock at night. He just sat down next to me, his back against the tub, his boots still on, his knee touching mine. I told him everything. I told him about Mitchell Greer and the 30-minute free consultation and the golden retriever photo on the desk. I told him about the 22 withdrawals, $19,800. I told him about the forged power of attorney and the notary named Patricia Elwin, who never notarized anything. I told him about the $25,000 second mortgage through North Star Capital Partners. I told him about the Ford F-150 sold to a stranger in Bloomington for $28,000. I told him about the text messages between Delaney and Megan dating back to September, the month after Dad started chemo, the month Delaney showed up with a casserole and a smile and a spare key hidden under the ceramic frog. I told him the total, $72,800. Travis did not move for a long time. His jaw did the thing, the tightening, the slow clench that starts at the back near his ear and works its way forward until the muscle in his cheek jumps once. I have seen him do that exactly 4 times in 9 years of marriage. When Harper was born 5 weeks early. When his mother called to say his father had a stroke. When the transmission on his rig blew outside Sioux Falls and the company tried to dock his pay. And now? When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even and completely controlled, which is how I knew he was furious. She sat at our kitchen table. She organized the folders. She told you the $750 was an auto pay. She looked you in the face and said it was Trent. He leaned his head back against the tub and stared at the ceiling. The bathroom fan was running. It has a rattle that we have been meaning to fix for 2 years and will probably never fix. He closed his eyes. How much did we pay, Mitchell? $3,400. From the joint savings, he nodded. He did not ask why I had not told him. He did not say I should have. He just nodded, because Travis understands that sometimes you carry something alone until you cannot, and then you put it down on a bathroom floor at 8 o'clock at night and hope the person next to you does not get up. He did not get up. We sat there for a while. I do not know how long. Long enough for the bathroom fan to cycle off and back on. Long enough for me to hear Harper turn over in her bed through the wall. Long enough for the cold tile to stop feeling cold. Then Travis said, "What do we do?" I said, "Leonard needs the report. We file it with the court." Mitchell said he can prepare a supplemental forensic filing for the hearing on April 8th. And Delaney? She does not know. She cannot know. Not yet. He looked at me. Can you do that? Can you look at her and act normal? I thought about it. I thought about Delaney sitting on our couch with Biscuit on her lap, scrolling her phone, eating the frozen pizza rolls I made at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. I thought about her voice, saying, "You are a better friend than I deserve." I thought about her hand on my arm at the funeral. I thought about the color-coded folders and the label maker and the spreadsheet she built to help me track my dead father's money while she was stealing it. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." Travis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of cinnamon gum. He unwrapped it slowly, folded the wrapper into a tiny square the way he always does, and put it in his mouth. Then he said, "Good. Because if I see her before the hearing, I am going to say something I cannot take back." The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life, and I spent 8 months watching my father die, so I know what long feels like. I became the best liar I have ever been for 14 days, and I hated every second of it. Delaney came over the next evening, a Friday, with a bottle of Moscato from the Target on Nicollet and a bag of those white cheddar popcorn puffs that Harper likes. She sat on the couch. Biscuit jumped onto the arm of the recliner and stared at the wall the way cats do when they are either seeing a ghost or simply being a cat. Delaney kicked off her shoes, tucked her feet underneath her, and said, "Any update from Leonard?" I said, "Nothing new, still waiting on the court." She nodded. Trent's lawyer is probably dragging it out. That is what they do. Pemberton is billing by the hour, and Trent is too stubborn to realize he is paying a man $275 every time he sends an email. She knew the billing rate. I had never told her the billing rate. Leonard had mentioned it once, in a phone call I took in my car. Alone. I smiled and said, "Probably." Travis was in the garage. He had been in the garage since Delaney's Subaru Outback pulled into the driveway, the one with the Adopt Don't Shop bumper sticker and the cracked taillight she had been meaning to fix since October. He said he was changing the oil in the snowblower. It was April. The snowblower did not need oil. But Travis understood that if he sat in the same room as Delaney Voss and she said one wrong word, one friendly word, one casually helpful word, he would not be able to keep the thing behind his teeth. So he changed the oil in the snowblower, and then he organized his socket wrenches by size, and then he swept the garage floor twice. The 2 weeks followed a pattern. Delaney came over 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She brought food. She brought wine. She brought updates on the legal situation that were always vaguely helpful and never quite specific. She said things like, "I talked to someone at the bank and they said the freeze might lift by May." She said things like, "I found a property lawyer who might give us a second opinion for free." She said things like, "I am on your side, Corinne. You know that." Every time she said something, I nodded. I smiled. I handed her a glass of wine. And then I went to the bathroom and gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white and stared at my own face in the mirror and thought about $72,800. The forensic report sat in a copy of Field and Stream magazine on the bookshelf in our bedroom. November 2023 issue. Walleye on the cover. Travis had slid the 26-page document inside the magazine on the first night, folded it in thirds, and placed the magazine between a stack of old issues that no one had touched since Walter gave them to us in a box labeled Good Reading 2 Christmases ago. It was the safest place in the house because Delaney had zero interest in freshwater fishing. One night, Tuesday of the second week, Delaney was in the kitchen helping me wash dishes. Harper was on the living room floor coloring a picture of a horse that had 6 legs because she said regular horses do not have enough. Travis was on a run to Duluth back by Thursday. It was just the 3 of us, Delaney, me, and the lie sitting between us like a third person at the table. She dried a plate, set it on the counter. Then she said, "I have been thinking, after this is over, after the hearing, maybe we should take a trip, just us, somewhere warm. I have not been anywhere since Kyle and I went to Cancun 4 years ago, and that does not count because I spent the whole trip crying in a resort bathroom." Cancun, the Cancun brochure, the one the forensic report mentioned. Megan had sent Delaney a screenshot of a Cancun resort package in one of their text exchanges from November, with the message, "After this is done, you deserve a vacation." Delaney had replied with a smiley face and the words, "Split the flight?" I dried my hands on the dish towel. I looked at her. She was smiling, that warm, open, easy smile that made you feel like the most important person in the room. The same smile she gave my father when she adjusted his blanket. The same smile she gave me at the funeral when she handed me a tissue from her left coat pocket. "That sounds nice," I said. She squeezed my arm. "We earned it. We earned it." I finished the dishes. I said goodnight. I watched her Subaru back out of the driveway, the cracked taillight blinking red in the dark. I stood at the window until the car turned the corner on Lyndale and disappeared. Then I walked to the bedroom. I pulled the November 2023 Field and Stream off the shelf. I opened it to the middle where the 26-page report was folded in thirds. I did not read it again. I did not need to. I had read it 11 times. I knew every line, every date, every dollar amount, every text message transcript. I put it back. I closed the magazine. I set it on the shelf between the October and December issues. 5 days. 5 days until the hearing. 5 days until Mitchell Greer walked into a courtroom with 26 pages and a flash drive and a man who had spent 19 years proving that the numbers do not lie. 5 days until the chair in the courtroom where Delaney Voss was supposed to sit would be empty. I turned off the light and lay down and stared at the ceiling and listened to the furnace click on. 5 days. I wore the black blazer I bought for my father's funeral. I had not worn it since January. It still smelled faintly of Luther Memorial Church, that mix of old wood and candle wax and something else I could never identify but will never forget. Travis wore a white button-down he had ironed himself at 6 in the morning. I know because I heard the ironing board creak open while I was brushing my teeth and staring at the mirror, trying to remember what my face looked like before all of this. We dropped Harper at my neighbor Mrs. Kowalski's house at 7:15. Harper was wearing her strawberry pajamas again because she refused to change, and Mrs. Kowalski said that was fine because they were going to make pancakes and watch a movie about a dog. Harper waved from the window. She was holding the stuffed rabbit in one hand and a granola bar in the other. I waved back and thought about how 5-year-olds have no idea that the world is burning around them, and how that is probably the only thing keeping the rest of us from falling apart completely. Hennepin County Courthouse. 4th floor, Courtroom C. The hallway smelled like floor polish and vending machine, coffee, and anxiety. Leonard Kessler was already there, standing outside the double doors in his gray suit with a file box at his feet and a calm expression that I had learned, over 3 months, meant he was fully prepared and mildly furious. "Mitchell is inside," he said. "He has the full report, the supplemental filing, and a flash drive with account records and communication transcripts. The judge has received the preliminary summary. We are ready." I nodded. "Are you ready?" he asked. I was not. I said, "Yes." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I do not know what I was expecting. Something from television, probably. Dark wood, high ceilings, a dramatic gallery. Instead, it was a medium-sized room with fluorescent lighting and beige walls and rows of padded chairs that looked like they belonged in a community college lecture hall. The judge's bench was raised, but not by much. There was a clock on the wall above the exit sign. It read 8:27. Trent was already seated on the left side, dark suit, no price tag this time. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, and his knee was bouncing under the desk the way it used to bounce when we were kids, and Mom called us into the kitchen to explain who broke the lamp. Megan sat behind him in the gallery. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, which I suppose was her version of courtroom armor. Dale Pemberton sat next to Trent with a leather briefcase and a legal pad, and the confident posture of a man who had billed $14,000 in 3 months and was hoping for a few more. I looked at the chair next to Megan. Empty. The chair where Delaney Voss should have been. The woman who brought casseroles and organized folders and adjusted my father's blanket and whispered, "You are a better friend than I deserve," and stole $72,800 from a dead man's estate. That chair was empty, and the only thing on it was a faint impression in the cushion from whoever had sat there during the previous hearing. I had sent Delaney a text the night before, "Hearing tomorrow. Wish me luck," she replied at 7:14 in the morning. "Good luck, babe. You have got this. Call me after." A smiley face. A heart emoji. 7:14 in the morning, and she did not show up. She already knew. I do not know how, but she knew. The judge entered at 8:32. Honorable Karen Lindquist, mid-60s, short gray hair, reading glasses, no nonsense. She had the kind of face that suggested she had heard every lie ever constructed in a probate courtroom and had stopped being impressed by any of them around 2006. Leonard presented first. He walked the judge through the original will, the 2022 signing, the 2024 update, the 70-30 split, my role as primary caregiver, the 8 months, the oxygen machine, the weight log, the hospice. He was methodical and calm and precise, and I realized for the first time that Leonard Kessler was not just a good lawyer. He was the kind of lawyer who made the truth sound exactly like what it was. Then he called Mitchell Greer. Mitchell stood up from the second row. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him well and carrying a black binder and the flash drive in his left hand. He walked to the front of the room the way a man walks when he has done this before and knows that the next 12 minutes will change the direction of every life in the room. He opened with the bank records. 22 unauthorized withdrawals from First Hennepin Bank, August 2024 through January 2025. $450, $600, $750, $1,100. Amounts small enough to avoid automatic fraud alerts. Amounts large enough to add up to $19,800 when you do the math over 5 months. He showed the power of attorney. Filed August 2024, Hennepin County Recorder's Office. The signature did not match Walter Aldridge's known handwriting. The notary, Patricia Elwin, had no record of the filing. The document was digitally reproduced, not hand-signed. It was used to authorize a $25,000 second mortgage through North Star Capital Partners, co-signed by Delaney Voss. He showed the vehicle title transfer, a 1,978 Ford F-150, appraised at $35,000, sold to a private buyer in Bloomington for $28,000 in November 2024. The listing was posted from an email account belonging to Delaney Voss. The payment was deposited into an account that was not part of the estate. He showed the text messages. 37 exchanges between Delaney Voss and Megan Aldridge. September 2024 through February 2025. Account balances. Asset values. Legal strategy. A screenshot of a Cancun resort package with the message, "After this is done, you deserve a vacation." A reply, "Split the flight?" A smiley face. The courtroom was silent. The clock on the wall said 8:44, 17 minutes. That is how long it took for Mitchell Greer to dismantle everything. I looked at Trent. His knee had stopped bouncing. His face was white. Not angry white, not defensive white. The kind of white that happens when you realize you have been holding a weapon someone else loaded. Dale Pemberton put his pen down. Judge Lindquist removed her reading glasses. She set them on the bench the way a teacher sets down a pen before telling a student something they are not going to enjoy hearing. She looked at Trent. She looked at Pemberton. She looked at Leonard. She looked at Mitchell Greer and his black binder and his flash drive. Then she looked at me. "The court has reviewed the supplemental forensic filing submitted by Mr. Greer," she said. "The evidence presented is substantial and deeply concerning. I am ordering an immediate suspension of all pending estate transfer motions. I am ordering a full investigation into the activities of Delaney Voss, including but not limited to the unauthorized withdrawals, the fraudulent power of attorney, and the unauthorized sale of estate property. I am referring this matter to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges." She paused. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing, and I thought about the supply closet at CVS and how the lights buzzed the same way the day Mitchell called and told me the truth. "I am also ordering that the original will of Walter Raymond Aldridge, dated 2022 and updated in early 2024, be upheld as valid, pending the outcome of this investigation. The 70-30 distribution shall proceed once all fraudulent encumbrances have been resolved." She looked at Trent one more time. "Mr. Aldridge, the court recognizes that you may have been misled regarding the circumstances of this estate. You are not currently a subject of this investigation. However, I strongly advise you to reconsider the counsel you have been keeping." Trent did not move. Megan stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. Her sunglasses were still on. Her heels clicked down the hallway and faded into nothing. Pemberton closed his briefcase. He shook Leonard's hand, which surprised me. Then he leaned toward Trent and said something I could not hear. Trent nodded once. Then Pemberton left. $14,000 in legal fees, walking out the door in a gray suit with a leather briefcase and nothing left to argue. Trent sat there. I sat there. The courtroom emptied. Leonard touched my shoulder and said, "I will call you tomorrow with next steps." Mitchell Greer nodded at me from the aisle, tucked the binder under his arm, and walked out. Travis was in the hallway. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and when I came through the double doors, he did not say anything. He just put his hand on the back of my neck and left it there while we walked to the elevator. We were almost at the car when I heard footsteps behind me. "Corinne." I turned around. Trent was standing on the courthouse steps. His tie was loosened. His hands were in his pockets. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller. The way people look when something they believed turns out to be a lie and they have not figured out what to replace it with yet. "I did not know," he said. I wanted to say something sharp, something about the 8 months, about the oxygen machine, about the phone calls that lasted 4 minutes, about the ski photos and the price tag on the funeral suit and the 6-page letter with 3 statutes, 2 of which were wrong. I wanted to say that not knowing is not the same as not being responsible, and that showing up only when there is money on the table is its own kind of fraud, even if no court will ever charge you for it. But I looked at his face, and I saw my father in it, the jaw, the way his eyes crinkle at the corners when he is trying not to cry, the way he stands with his weight on his left foot, the same way Dad stood in the garage when he was thinking about something he did not want to say out loud. "I know," I said. "That was it. I did not hug him. He did not hug me. We just stood there on the courthouse steps in the April cold, two people who shared a father and a refrigerator full of magnets and a childhood we would never agree on, and for the first time in 6 months, neither of us was fighting. Travis drove us home. I picked up Harper from Mrs. Kowalski's house. She had pancake syrup on her chin and a drawing of a dog with wings. She said, "Mommy, Mrs. Kowalski let me use the red crayon and the gold crayon." I said, "That is amazing, baby." She said, "The dog can fly because I said so." I said, "That is how it works." That evening, after Harper was asleep, I drove to the house on Lyndale Avenue, alone. I had not been inside since early March. The lawn needed mowing. The gutters had leaves from the fall that no one had cleaned. The garage door still squeaked when I opened it, and the sound hit me in the chest the way familiar sounds do when the person they belong to is gone. I went to the kitchen, the yellow walls, the counter where Dad made coffee every morning at 5:45, the cabinet where I taped his medication schedule, the fish magnets on the refrigerator, still holding index cards in blue ink, walleye opener May 11. Call furnace guy, Corinne birthday Tuesday, do not forget cake. I pulled the refrigerator away from the wall. It took some effort. The floor underneath was dusty, and there was a penny from 2019, and a twist tie, and a single fish-shaped magnet that had fallen behind sometime in the last year. And there was the note. A small index card, blue ink, my father's handwriting. The handwriting of a man who spent 35 years fixing pipes and reading crossword puzzles and writing messages on index cards because he believed that the important things should be written down and stuck to the refrigerator where you could see them every day. It said, "Corinne gets the truck. She earned it." I held the card in both hands. I stood in the yellow kitchen in the empty house on Lyndale Avenue in South Minneapolis, and I read those 7 words and I cried. Not the ugly Target parking lot kind. Not the bathroom floor kind. The quiet kind. The kind that starts in your chest and comes out slow and does not make a sound because some things are too heavy for noise. He knew. Somehow, in some way, in the middle of the chemo and the weight loss and the oxygen machine and the crosswords he could not finish, he knew I would take care of it. He knew I would find the truth. He knew I would be standing in this kitchen, pulling this refrigerator away from this wall, reading this card. He knew. 2 weeks after the hearing, Delaney Voss was arrested at her condo in Edina. She was charged with felony theft, forgery, and fraud. Biscuit was taken in by the animal shelter where Delaney used to volunteer. I heard they renamed him Cheddar. I do not know if that is true, but I hope it is, because that cat deserved a fresh start, and honestly, so did the rest of us. The estate was settled in June. I got the house, I got the savings, I got the insurance, I got the fishing gear and the crossword books and the 4 walleye mugs and every single fish magnet. And I got the truck. If you are listening to this at 2 in the morning, or on your commute, or in a parking lot somewhere, I want you to know something. The people who love you leave signs, not always obvious ones. Sometimes they are hidden behind a refrigerator, written in blue ink, held up by a magnet shaped like a fish. But they are there. You just have to be willing to pull the refrigerator away from the wall. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me about the notes your people left behind. I read every single one. And Dad, if you are out there somewhere, the truck runs fine. I changed the oil last Thursday. The cassette player still works. Johnny Cash still sounds good on Lyndale Avenue. I earned it.